This lecture is about finding sources. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about assessing sources. Sources can be classified as primary or secondary, scholarly or non-scholarly. In that lecture, we're going to describe the shelf life of accuracy, and we're going to talk about peer reviews and money. But in this lecture, we're going to talk about finding sources. There are 4 important ways that knowledge was and is conveyed: other people, archives, public libraries, schools, and the press, and TV, radio, the internet, and social media. Well, the first place to think about finding other sources is other people. The most obvious place you can look for information is other people. We all begin gathering information about the world through our own senses and through the experiences of other people around us. Our guardians tell us what to do and what not to do based on what they know about the world. In our own lives, the first source of information is other people. More broadly, other people are the source of expertise in any pre-literate culture. If you want to know the progression of stars, or when to plant a crop, or how to knit a sock, or how to build a house, or how to get the benefit of the roots or leaves or flower of a plant, you need to find someone who knows and can tell you. Pre-literate cultures are heavily dependent upon memory and typically revere older people who have an acquired knowledge set. If you live without books, an alphabet, or some other way to store an externalized memory, other people are precious. Of course, other people are also fragile and finite. These images before you are ideas that are lost to time, lost because there was no chain of communication between then and now. And by the way, I'll tell you that you're going to hear as background me flipping the pages because I am reading from a script, the script which you will find on the bookshelf. All right, on the left, you're going to see the Marshak bone, which is named after the journalist Alexander Marshak. He's the first person to examine it carefully. He showed that this 30,000 years plus old bone appeared to have been marked with the cycles of the moon. Nobody knows what that person was thinking when they carved those little circles or half circles in the bone. There wasn't a written language, but that bone is early evidence that somebody was observing and recording. We will never know if these ideas died with the carver or were passed along. On the upper right-hand side, you see a panel of lions in Chavy, a cave in France, where ancient peoples drew many pictures of recognizable animals. It's a beautiful panel. It's full of the excitement of the chase. You can see that the person who carved it wanted to show details and time and motion. But again, you don't know what they were thinking. Were they telling future generations something? Or were they just enjoying the lions that they knew? Well, there are symbols that accompany these beautiful works of art in caves. No one understands them. The knowledge was not passed down to us. Now, the central image is an image of fishhooks, because when I was reading a popular book on anthropology called Guns, Germs, and Steel, I ran across a fact, a small little fact, a fact that really stuck with me. The author of the book said that a particular island in the Pacific had apparently lost the use of fishhooks. They disappeared from the archaeological record. People simply stopped fishing. How could that be? Did people really stop liking fish? Did they stop teaching each other how to make fishhooks? It struck me as strange then, and it strikes me as strange now. But it makes the point I want to make. Knowledge has to be transmitted from person to person in cultures that don't have writing. If it is not, then it is lost. Now, the last image on the lower right is one that I think is particularly telling. It shows a process called trephination, which means drilling a hole in the skull. This operation was carried out on a real person living in 6500 BCE in France, without power drills, without antibiotics, without an operating room, and the person to whom this was done lived. The bone healed. Nobody knows how or even why this was done, but if ideas are not shared and transmitted, it's the same thing as having a hole in your skull and all the ideas flying out. Nobody will ever know what you know if you don't tell somebody, if there is no written language. So the first and most important primary source is other people. You may need to find someone who knows what you want to know. And it's possible that what you want to know has never been written down anywhere. You may be the first to write it down. After a group of people develops an alphabet or a writing system, they have a secondary way to store information. We find in the history of the world when writing systems come into play, people use it first for Well, you might not guess this, but for receipts and demonstrating that taxes are paid. Tools for standardized thinking allow for easier control of large groups of people. Alphabets and empires tend to run in parallel. Alphabets and trade are also a co-development. Early writing records receipts, boundary lines, religious rituals, and stories. Early tablets and scrolls were handwritten, and they naturally require quite a bit of investment in time. Books, also handwritten, are an invention that appears around 800 AD in Western China along the Silk Road. Any book or scroll that is handwritten will be expensive and rare, and a collection of books is even more rare and more expensive. Were you to wish to learn from books rather than people, you would typically go to a community where books have been collected. What communities are those? Almost always religious communities or ruling courts. You can get access to books by devoting yourself to a community. Even if you are a poor person, that doorway is open to you. You can spend time in the libraries associated with those courts or those monasteries. Great cities of learning where books and information were collected include Seville, Toledo, and Istanbul, pictured here. Some information about Greece and Rome comes to us through Arabic scholars. The story of transmission of ancient knowledge to Renaissance writers is pretty breathtaking if you think about all the moments between, say, 300 BCE and 1300 AD, when something could have been lost. For example, Lucretius was a Roman poet living around 55 BCE who wrote about the Epicurean view of the soul, the mind, the universe, and the natural world. He wrote 6 books in the form of a long poem. His work was copied and recopied and eventually made its way to a library in Germany around 800 AD, but it was lost everywhere else. And there it sat, unread, for 500 years, until it was found by the Italian monk and papal secretary Poggio Bracciolini, pictured here. Bracciolini had a bit of a break because there was a long interchurch fight about who should be pope. So he took an extended vacation to visit various monastic libraries on the hunt for old classical texts with information that had been forgotten. He discovered many manuscripts, but this Epicurean Roman poem, De Rerum Natura, was the most influential of the things he found. It was copied and recopied and became a part of the modern understanding of the world. In fact, this center picture is not the actual book he first saw. This book he first saw, he lent to a friend and he didn't get it back for 14 years. That's an occupational hazard of having a small, select, handwritten library. Every single item is extremely valuable, and the people who borrow them may use them very slowly. Sorry, my cat's on my lap. He's getting in the way here. All right. On the right, you see the image of Zodiac Man, representing Renaissance ideas about medicine and the stars. It shows what parts of the body are affected by which constellations. It's written out as guild or trade secret information for those who are part of the Barber of Surgeons Guild, right? It shows you how to diagnose and treat illnesses. It's a guild secret, a specialized book which would not be shared with others. At this point, information was rare, expensive, and localized. If you wanted to have access to information, you needed to join the group that had the keys. And this is the question you might need to ask yourself now as you are doing research. Is there a special location for information? Is it in a special spot owned by a particular organization? And do you know someone with the keys? Our third source of information undergirds the way we live now. We don't live in a world where most information is guarded by special groups, or you need to join a special group of people to get access to it. In your world, and mine, we have free access to information everywhere. Around the 1460s, the printing press really got going in Europe. Printed books became available. The market for books did not fully exist when books began to be widely printed. The culture had to catch up. But because books became comparatively much cheaper and widely available, many more people invested the time in learning how to read and write. The market and the product developed together. The scope of available information expanded tremendously. Now it was possible to hear old ideas, new ideas, and ideas from very different languages, groups, and cultures during your own lifetime. The printing press was just the start. It took another 400 years for the shape of the modern world to emerge. The movement for public schools and free libraries in the U.S. comes in the 1850s and 1860s, around the time of the American Civil War, the time of my great-great-grandparents, the 1860s, It began to be expected that children would go to school and learn to read and write, and that they themselves would own books and use books to inform themselves about the world. Around the same time as the movement for public schools came another key invention, the steam-driven rotary printing press. The telegraph had also been recently invented and had been strung along the new train tracks. People could move much faster, and so could information. Papers and circulars could be inexpensively printed and shipped to eager readers. When we think about the ubiquity of information that began to be a reality in the 1860s, with the advent of the penny press and the telegraph, we can see that naturally the expectations for public life changed. For instance, there's no government in the modern world that does not derive some of its legitimacy from being able to educate its citizens from kindergarten through at least 8th grade or possibly 12th grade. An inability to provide a basic education for its citizens is a marker for an ineffective and ill-regulated government. How are these ideas expressed in America? The two images here on the left and the right are the free press and public education. And on the right-hand side, it's a 1940s poster that was part of a wartime series expressing these particular American values: free schools, free opportunity, free enterprise, which together built the most decent nation upon earth. Yes, this picture features boys, but these narratives are in our history. Public schools and the free press are what we expect an informed democracy to rest upon. Some libraries, like schools, are also supported by the public so that information can be freely available to everyone. Most schools are expected to have an attached library open to all students, and NCC, like every other school, has a robust library which is kept up to date for students. Well, that's the world from 1460 to 1860, and then 1860 to 1990, the development of the free press, the public library, and public information. In this world, information is still anchored at locations, but it is relatively inexpensive to access those locations. These public libraries, schools, and the press are really designed for everyone. So as you are a student at NCC, please come to the library and use it. Many of us do turn first to digital or media sources, and that's really pretty natural. We have often a computer on our desk or a phone in our hands. The internet, TV, radio, or social media are places we go to glean information about the world. Now on the left is Walter Cronkite, representing an era when the U.S. was unified by just a few social media platforms. And at the right is a little sketch describing the idea of DARPANET, which was the first U.S. government investment in a computer network. That internet allowed information sources and sites a common space, connected but separate. And that is how you and I usually find information now, somewhere in digital space. Because the sources of information on social media and the internet are often less obvious, it's important to check the editors, reviewers, and funders. Most especially, you want to check the funders. We'll discuss how to follow the money in a following lecture. Libraries are now at least half digital. Because packaging information is a business, most academic libraries consist of the physical collections of books and digital collections of information scanned and put into order. The companies that specialize in collecting and packaging information are a mixture of names you know and some you don't: Google, EBSCOhost, ProQuest, JSTOR, Gale, and so on. You'll get to know the names of these digital storage sites. The most recent development in information collection is AI. AI is a new way of collecting and packaging information through large language models and machine learning. Artificial intelligence, AI, functions something like an encyclopedia, but unlike an encyclopedia, AI can be powerfully directed by your prompts. So in this lecture, I've introduced these four sources of information: other people, specialized books, publicly available books and information, and publicly available digital information. All of these sources are still essential for you doing research now. You may need to meet someone who knows what you need to know. You may need to look at a specialized collection of information that is not scanned and on the internet. You may need to visit a library for a book. You might need to access a local newspaper, a recent newspaper, to find out something you need to know about the present. You might be interacting with social media, TV, radio, and the internet. You might be using digital archives. When you set out to research a topic, you will choose some or all of these possibilities. Consider this. If you are asked to interview someone, you are working with the oldest way of gathering information. Interviewing is an essential skill for researchers, so if you use a site like ChatGPT to start your research, you are using the newest way to gather information. But composing useful and effective questions is an essential skill for researchers, whether you are talking to a human or to a program. Here are three final notes. First, most of us expect that information of importance has been scanned and is available online. For some kinds of information, that's true. For other kinds, that's not true. Consider that some of what you want to know is online, but some of it is not. If you look at this slide, you can see that 3 of the 4 sources are important, but not available to you digitally. So just remember that when you're doing research, you really need to think about all the places information could be, and not all of it is digital. Then the next thing I'd like you to remember is that every kind of source has its own perils. Misinformation is possible at every step. One older person can forget something essential, and no one will be able to correct that error. A person writing a book by hand can make a mistake, and the next person copying that book will continue to make that mistake. A person printing a book can broadcast mistakes very quickly, as fast as those books are sold and carried to other places. A person who puts wrong information on the internet will spread misinformation even faster and be even harder to catch. And the same thing applies to machine learning, but the scope and scale of mistakes becomes broader yet. Mistakes pile upon mistakes, and the concatenation of misinformation becomes a truly frightening Frankenstein. So, I've told you that you need to become an expert in looking for and finding relevant sources, and next we'll talk about those primary and secondary sources, scholarly and non-scholarly sources, and how long information is relevant. And we'll also discuss how to cite the information that you found. Third and last, I want to take just a moment to think about the essence of your education. And 3 words will help: alphabet, literate, internet. Because your language has an alphabet, you had an education, and you can read. That fact alone puts you in the minority in all of human history. Because you are literate, you can interact with the minds and ideas from millions of experts. You are not trapped in one little village of knowledge. And because you live in a place where you have access to the internet, things you never even dreamed about knowing are available for you to get to know. So be thankful that you live where and when you do.